Meeting is now called to order. We're going to start with the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Has anybody have any issues with the minutes at all from October 1st?
Are we going to have anybody?
Yeah, that's next. We'll get to it. I want to try and get some of the things out of the way real fast because Mary has to leave.
There's a couple of dates wrong.
A couple of days wrong.
Under action item C, it talked about the 15th and then turned around and uses 21st twice versus the 15th.
I'm sorry, what was that one more time?
In paragraph C, agenda items for the next scheduled meeting, it says they're going to be on the 15th and 29th, but then when they talk about the topics, they say 21st, and then they talk about the 21st again. So both of those should be the 15th.
Right, thank you.
Anything else anybody seen? Can I get unanimous consent to approve the minutes with the corrections made? Okay, thank you. That's out of the way. We will now turn, we have a public audience. Ms. Coe is the public tonight, so please.
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. First of all, I'm here also to talk to you about the town manager. I noticed that the agenda had things on it that I'll talk about later, but the fact is that I think your main charge should be changing the charter to a town manager, looking into that, and deciding that that is the appropriate course, and that's a big job. And I think you ought to devote your attention to that. And I noticed in the paper that Lisa Heavner and Philip Perciello wanted some kind of blended kind of selectman and pseudo town manager kind of issue, and I think that that's totally inappropriate. I'm running as first selectman, and my position is that we get a full town manager. We don't have two people doing the same job. You have one voice if you have a town manager, and you have professional development. And this is the appropriate thing for Simsbury, who's the only town that does not have a town manager of our the amount of people in our town. So I think we ought to look seriously at that, and you'll have to spend a lot of time doing that to decide what's the appropriate thing for Simsbury. Years ago, we had Mary Glassman's first administration. The charter revision came up with a bifurcated charter where the first selectman was a salaried person and the town manager or pseudo-town manager would be a paid, high-level paid employee, and they were both getting paid. And at that time, the Board of Selectmen reviewed it and looked at it and decided that was inappropriate and just voted against the entire charter. So that's part of the background history of what's going on with that. And I think you ought to look seriously into changing the charter to a town manager. I also looked at this discussion and possible action charge on related to gender neutrality. As far as I'm concerned, that's a total distraction. I don't think we have to worry about gender neutrality. I think that we don't have to always be politically correct. And if you start with gender neutrality, you change everything. And I don't think we need a complete change. So I think that that's a distraction. I don't think it should be brought to you. And I think we ought to move on. I don't know about the budget referendum and all, but I think the referendum should be all of the budgets. It shouldn't have a 1% level or 2% or whatever it is. All budgetary items should be before the public for a vote. So that is for transparency and also for the people to give input and decide for themselves how they want their money spent. So that's it. The rest is just business for you, and there's nothing to really talk about as far as that's concerned. Thank you for listening, and I hope we move on and spend more time with the town manager. But this is a cleanup kind of thing that you're doing.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you steal my agenda?
Nope, I did not. This is mine. You always ask me that. Here's yours.
You took it somewhere.
No, I didn't. I never took it. There it is.
Okay, fortunately, I've memorized it. The next item we have will be the gender neutrality issue. Is there anyone who would like to, on the committee, who would like to address that at all? Anybody have a feeling for that?
Did you notice where that shows up, the non-gender?
Even in the references we have here with the Finance Committee, the Finance Commission, I should say, the monies are, and this is a minor thing, obviously, the monies are sent to him as opposed to them. It occurs not infrequently, but, in various areas of the charter. My own personal comment, and usually, it's only because there's a few of us, I'll make it now, is, and you would have a better feel for it certainly than I would, but I always found it when I was in Westport strange to call Diane Farrell the first selectman. I
Yeah.
thought she should either be the first select person or the first select woman, and I don't know that you necessarily have to formalize which she's called, but I think when you have references in the charter which are specific, gender specific, we can probably, I would suggest we make them neutral, whereas it doesn't conflict with anything. I
Yeah.
asked Bob about it. He said it's real easy, you just plug it into the
Yeah.
computer. Boom.
And I guess I would strongly support making the titles gender neutral. I think it's an easy fix for a time that's come. And I think that I just wanted to know where, obviously the select man is an obvious change, but I wasn't sure how rampant it was throughout the charter. But, I think it's important to indicate that men or women can serve the town, and I think that would be a good, it's a small change, but a big message, because it would send a message that we're sensitive to.
And I would think that anywhere it says chairman, it can just say the chair, which is perfectly
Yes.
acceptable. And the same thing, wherever it says him, it can be them, or they, whatever the appropriate ground would be in that particular situation. It doesn't change the meaning of anything.
Right.
But as you said, I think it sends a little bit of a message.
So I would make a motion that we recommend the gender neutrality changes be made as a draft, so the board can actually see where those changes will be made and decide whether or not to accept them.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I second.
Second by Tom. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Thank you. Just want to make sure I get this in the right order here now. Well, hey, Joe, would you want to make a little presentation on some of the items in your memo?
Sure.
And if you, I guess also Sean's memo too, or there's three separate memos?
That was attached, yes, right?
Yeah.
They have,
Okay.
they have both, yep. And I believe that the first one they have is Sean's. Not that that matters.
I mean, they're both on the same
Both basically the same topic. And what we're talking about is content of public notices for the budget is technically the second item, and then the budget preparation and budget referendum.
Correct.
So any changes that the finance department might suggest that we should consider?
Yes. I think my memo actually tries to go section by section on what I would recommend, but we'll go over Sean's first. Sean's is definitely very clear. The language that's in the charter right now, as far as getting out the budget referendum, it's open to interpretation in certain areas. What we wanted to kind of do was give a little bit more of consistency and provide language that is essentially no later than dates. So, for example, right now, the Board of Education has to provide the budget to the Board of Finance by March 15th. The Board of Selectmen doesn't present it until March 30th, essentially, no later than March 30th. We're talking about, the Board of Finance is actually requested to try and get that a little bit earlier, so we peeled that back to March 15th. We're recommending March 15th, just so that the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen are consistent. They have to provide their budgets by the same date. We also wanted to set the public hearing at a time no later than April 8th, as opposed to setting a certain number of days. We actually struggle every year trying to put together the budget because of some of the constraints that are in there. And what this hopefully does is gives us the flexibility and predictability where we can look at a calendar and quite simply say, by this date, Board of Finance, you have to act. By this date, Board of Selectmen, you have to act. that was really the only substantive changes on that portion.
Can I jump in for just a second?
Absolutely.
This can't be understated. Every year, in our world, the first selectman asks for the budget calendar. And a large number of people disappear into a room and come out 3 days later with a series of potential dates that may or may not play out. It leads to uncertainty and stress in a number of different offices. And to clarify it like this, we've gone through it carefully with the town clerk as well, would be enormously helpful. I also want to mention that Paul Hinault called earlier today and stated that in the event he wasn't here, he liked the approach to this. He thought that you might even be able to, and I'm speaking for Paul here, you might even be able to push the dates for the presentation of the budget to the Board of Finance even earlier, and the timeline for submission of the final budget to the town clerk a bit later. But just so you have Paul's thoughts on it.
I mean, in what the date ranges that we provided you guys allows everyone within the process time to do what we need to do. We run into problems with dealing with the Hartford Current and trying to get a full page at it, right? Typically, you have to give them to them 7 to 8 days in advance just to get it in. The timelines that we gave, provided we don't make any changes to what we actually publicly notice, allow us to work within the timeframes. My concern so far has been that one year I'm going to come in and basically we're not going to be able to hold the election or hold the referendum because we weren't able to get the public notice out in time because the Hartford Current requires 5 days notice or something to that extent. So this was really just cleanup. We had I had some other nickel dime stuffs. I don't know if you guys have my memo that specs it out by section. I mean, I can walk you through essentially what I was trying to do with that. Like in section 406. Go ahead.
Question on the first piece. Did you want to have the whole presentation and then questions? But I had a
Yeah, I think let him do an overall, comment on it, and then we can get specific with him.
Thank you.
All right. Section 406, I wanted to remove the reference to the town meeting. We don't really have a town meeting anymore. I mean, you still, obviously, the residents still have the right to call for a town meeting, but as far as the budget goes, it's not a town meeting style. I don't know why the language still exists. Also, in there's a reference to 1% of the annual budget going out to referendum. I believe the intent of that entire section was 2%, so this has become a point of contention with bond counsel. So bond counsel has essentially made us put out to referendum any line item over 1%. These are specifically capital items. I think that the intent during the last charter revision was for it to be 2%. If it wasn't the intent, then fine, just make sure it's consistent. Either have 1% there or 2%. I don't have a preference one way or the other, just as long as there's consistency. Also in section 406, I want to remove any reference to date ranges, and consistent with Sean's message, basically set the dates to no later than languages, rather than saying between 7 days and 14 days this has to be done, just say no later than XYZ date. Section 806, which is the Board of Education. This is just a matter of consistency. It talks about by the 15th day of March. Obviously, I believe the intent is March 15th, but is that business days? Is it calendar days? Just set it consistent. Because then we always look at it whether or not there's a holiday. 807, same thing. That's us. That's the Board of Selectmen side. Just set it consistent with 806. Change the dates to no later than. My recommendation is to have it on the same day as the Board of Education. I don't know why we have more time than the Board of Education, but I know the Board of Finance would actually like this information earlier. I don't believe it poses any problems on our side as far as trying to get it out. Section 808, remove any reference to multiple public hearings. This has been a constant conversation every year. My understanding is you guys used to have 2 public hearings each budget time. You're only required to have 1. Board of Finance or anyone can call for additional public hearings, but the mere reference of there being a second one sometimes begs the question of whether or not they have to hold one. And we have this it's like Groundhog Day every February. We have the same conversation. Again, establish a no later than date for the public hearing. The point 3 in section 808 is, I believe, the next agenda item. That's essentially on the public notice. I'd like to change what we notice. I don't know if you guys have seen what we notice. Sean's going to bring it upstairs when he gets here, but it's a full-page ad in the Hartford Current. Costs anywhere from $2,500 to $4,000 every time we do it. You don't need to notice that much. The charter can specify that you're calling for a referendum on such and such a date at such and such a location. We'll make the information available on the website as well as the town clerk. I also don't even care if we mail it out to people. Dealing with the Hartford Current has caused problems, and it is, in my opinion, it's cost prohibitive. We'll spend anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 a year just advertising these. Remove the reference to the public hearings. If there's only a requirement for one hearing, just remove the constraint. And then again, establish a specific date that the Board of Finance needs to act by. And we threw out April 20th, sitting with the town clerk, because that gave her enough time to make sure that she was able to hire enough people to work the referendum and get the ballots. And then section 812, if anyone can tell me what that means, I'm sorry, section C, under 812, I have no idea what that means. And that falls in my purview, so. I'm not doing it.
It's going to say pay to her from now on, though, not just, or whoever.
Ironically, the only reference to him that I saw in the charter is actually all in finance.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I had. I'm definitely open to questions.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on this? Mary?
Thank you. I like the suggestion that it be published online, and because I think people pay their taxes online, they're used to looking for information online. But I noticed that the recommendation in the first memo doesn't require it. So I was just wondering if we are not going to publish the full budget in the newspaper, could we put in there that the full budget would be online?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could add that language.
It certainly was the intent.
I know, because it's in your memo, but it just didn't translate into the
That has to be
actual language.
required if we do that.
Yeah. And then my second question was, applying your revised budget calendar to 2016, the town clerk could file the budget by Friday, April 29th, and then the referendum would be held on May 10th. And that seems like enough time for people to look at it. I just wanted to check and see, in practicality, if that happens in 2016, do people feel comfortable with that time frame?
There's, if I can speak to that, actually, there's the way this was set up reduces the number of options for absentee ballots, which the town clerk recommended. If you file the budget more than 21 days prior to the referendum, there's one absentee ballot process you have to follow. If it's within 21 days, it's a different absentee ballot process. Her feeling was that that would become very confusing for residents, and to avoid that, if you by using that April 25th to April 30th time frame for the filing of the budget, you would always have enough time to print all the ballots. You would always be within one of the two absentee ballot formats. Once again, it's predictable. Everyone would know when the budget's going to be with the town clerk. The goal there was to simplify things, but we did test a number of different years to make sure that it always worked.
So according to that, if I can follow up, so if the budget's approved on April 20th, and just again going back to next year as an example, so if the Board of Finance approves the budget on Wednesday, April 20th, it's a week, and it's like 10 days before it has to be filed. But if there was a provision that would be online available earlier, that may address some concerns I have that people can't find it.
Well,
I
that's-
just worry about people being able to just see the budget, like waiting 10, you could, not that anybody would, but you could not file it until the
spring it,
latest
yeah.
day and then have less time to, so I understand the publication, but just the question to think about whether it could be made available online in a reasonable time to make the changes to the budget online.
That's fine.
The former first selectman, I will point out, was insistent that we have budget information online throughout the process, in whatever state. So I
You
think
weren't
this is-
surprised by my question.
I was, and it makes all the sense in the world. It's the transparency issue.
I'd just like to speak to the issue of not placing a public notice in a newspaper. Having worked with disadvantaged people in a large part of my career, a lot of them don't have access to online. A lot of the elderly people in town may not have access to online, and this may, in a sense, disenfranchise some of them if we're not publishing, or at least providing notice in a newspaper to either our disadvantaged population or to our elderly population. I know all of us are glued to these things, but I think there is still a significant percentage of our population that is not, and I would not want to be seen as cutting them out of the voting process concerning the budget of our town.
Would that be addressed if we included a statement that we would, upon request, mail out a copy of the budget?
I think that would address it, provided that the publication happened sufficiently in time
Right.
to mail it out, and then, but then we're talking about taking out the publication requirement because it puts us up against the deadline.
We're not taking out the publication from the current.
Just the full-
Just the full page. Now it's gonna be something small that says.
And you get the smaller things in more quickly?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Probably the next day. so.
Okay. That would work for me.
And didn't I see something in here that there were going to be copies available at the town hall too?
That's
So,
always true.
There always
yeah.
is,
Great.
yeah.
I think they were always.
Bob, is there any clash with Connecticut statutory law on publication?
Well, 7-344, which is currently referenced in the charter, does lay out a format for budget. I think what Simsbury publishes goes even beyond that. But the general rule is, because the local budget process is a matter of local concern and not statewide concern, you can establish any rules in your charter that are, the minimal standards are probably a lot lower than even 7-344. Provided you meet the sort of threshold of due process by informing people of the major budget items that they're being asked to vote on. I think what's suggested here is well within that standard, though.
I mean, it's clearly the trend. In my practice, I do some foreclosure auction work and things like
Right.
that, and those ads have shrunk because they were cost prohibitive and the cost was passed on to an already distressed homeowner.
Yeah.
So now they do a very small ad that references back to the judicial website. And if our court system finds that satisfies due process, I would think to save the town probably $5,000 on this ad.
I mean, I think I'm like a lot of people. If it's in the paper, I'll never see it because I don't get the paper anymore.
Right.
Online, so it's changing times. And
Ironically, because of the size of the size of the ad that we have to place, it very rarely appears in the public notice section. It's usually, I think last year was in the sports section.
We are contributing to the demise of the current, though. It's
But I'll take a closer look at that, and I could even give you something in writing, but the initial reaction is this is well within your discretion, writers of the charter.
That would be my only concern, that we conflicts with statute.
If you don't have a charter, then 7-344 is the standard you have to follow, but it's pretty well accepted Connecticut law that where you have a charter and the issue is a matter of strictly local concern, and you'll hear this from me a lot throughout this process, that you're given great latitude to develop your own system of public notice.
I think my biggest concern was kind of echoes what Melissa, is to make sure that people who don't necessarily use the internet, because there still are people, have some way of knowing about it, and whether it's published in the paper initially, telling them that they can get it at town hall, telling them that we'll mail them something, where everybody has the opportunity to get it.
More than happy to make them available at other sites
Yeah.
within the town if we wanted to designate them.
Yeah, I think that would be very sensible. Anyone else?
Could I speak to another section?
Sure.
Are we going to move on from this section, or?
Well, yeah, well, we can keep moving on.
Okay, so with respect to the comments on Section 808, number numeral 1, removing any reference to multiple public hearings, because I'm a statutory interpretation nut, I actually would caution against that, because if anybody looks at this in the future and says, oh, they took out the reference to or more, I think right now it's very clear that they can have one or more at their discretion. There is no requirement other than just one, but if you take something out and somebody goes back later on and looks back, the legislative history is going to say that we deleted or more, suggesting that our intent was to have only one hearing on that particular subject. So I would be more inclined to leave that in, just in case in the future they wanted to have multiple hearings and felt constrained not to because of the legislative history.
Makes sense.
That's just me.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
None of these lawyers are arguing with you.
Too tired.
It doesn't hurt to leave it in.
Yeah.
It doesn't require them to do anything, so I agree with Melissa.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
On 406, Joe, and I commend you for some nice work here.
Great.
You obviously put some time into this. I think your proposal to strike the 1% line, the way I read that first sentence, the or in the second sentence is the big qualifier there.
Would have benefited from some commas, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but or refers you to section 409, which is a different type of meeting than the budget meeting,
Right.
if I understand it correctly. So
It may very well be.
I think that's the problem.
And
Is
if that's the case, I'd love to just see that 1% become 2%. Because what my bond counsel says to me every year, because I
Bond
try and make the
counsel's
same argument, is that section 406 says only items over 2% have to go out for referendum. And she goes, as long as you can tell me who approves between 1% and 2%, I will go along with your argument. I lose every year.
We have told her the Board of Selectmen approves,
but isn't 409 a different type of meeting?
it is.
It absolutely is.
So
That's the history of that is, the last charter revision, did away with the town meeting. And that was a big step. So the idea was, some people were a little bit reluctant to completely do away with any town meeting. And the compromise position was to have town meeting by initiative. And that's where Section 409 came in. But we absolutely do have to do something with this language, because bond counsel doesn't think it's sufficiently clear for her to give a clean opinion. And that's very, very important. So I think Joe's suggestion is that we should have her review this. It's a step in that direction.
Okay. Go.
May I suggest then for bond counsel, you add a comma on the second line between year and or, and add a comma, 4 lines down between the words year and shall. That clearly sets off the town meeting initiated under section 409 and the 1%. It clearly sets that apart from the 2% requirement. So unless you want town meeting section 409 actions to be 2%, then the 1% is contained solely to the section 409 meetings.
Yeah,
You can solve it either by
She didn't
commas
bite it.
or by,
I talked with her.
I got an
on
A+ in stats.
And, I deferred to her because she's the one that's got to write the opinion letter, but intent was the lower threshold, because 1% is $950,000. And the idea was that, that's a lot of money for the Board of Selectmen to be able to approve without any input from the general public. And the idea was that if there was a project that was controversial, there should be some mechanism to allow petitioners or some group of people, if they really feel strongly about it, to put it to a vote. And that's where that section 409 came from. As long as the language is clarified to her satisfaction, it's a policy issue what these thresholds ought to be.
Bob, if I can suggest, in this particular area, between you and the bond council, could you rewrite this?
Yeah, that's what I always had in mind.
We'll come back, and we can, we've answered most of the
Yeah.
other issues, address that, edit, and then we can re-vote on this particular
Right,
section. We don't have to make a vote on it
We'll have a
tonight.
conference call with her, but the 1%, 2%, that's up to you. Those thresholds are yours. It's just clarifying the language, and she doesn't care how it reads, as long as it
As long as
reads
it's
clearly
clear.
enough, So we'll do that.
Okay, that'd be great, I appreciate that. Anything else from anybody? Okay, so we're not going to vote on that particular item now until we get the new language. Okay. Then the next item is, we're going to move on to content of public notices, which we've kind of indirectly touched on here. Anybody, anything on that, or?
That's essentially what I was talking about, just calling the date, the location, stating that it's available online with the link, and providing locations that you guys specify, or
Well, I would make a motion that we adopt a short form advertising for the budget, provided that we have hard copies of the budget at Town Hall, and the residents can ask for a copy by mail, and we'll comply with that, and subject to Bob getting back to us if there's any statutory requirement that we would be running afoul of. So that's the motion I'll make.
Just a clarification, the online, that it was also available online?
Yes.
Did you mean to include that in your motion?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you.
Second?
Second.
Seconded.
Who's second? Oh, thanks.
Any comments? Yeah. Ready to vote? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes. I think we're actually done today.
I think we're actually done.
Now,
This is a great
before
day for meetings.
Before we adjourn, what I'd like to do next time, and I'll send you an email on it, I want to do the planning and zoning issue,
Okay.
but I would like you to make sure that somebody can represent each body can be here.
Yep.
Okay? And there was something else I wanted after that, so let me find that.
In the minutes, you had the other one on the permanent committees.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I wrote it down. And the permanent committees, that was the next one. And I think I wanted to try and sneak one third in. What we can do is, by the way, Bob, if you've come back with language on, item 2 today, we can kind of just roll that right back into, well, that's a special, is that still a special meeting next week?
Yes, it
In
is.
2 weeks, I mean?
I think the
So
next
we-
one's our
so-
last special meeting.
Okay, if we get it soon enough, we'll add it. If not, we'll just add it on to a regular meeting, because then we can change the agenda on that. And I'd like to do the Open Space Committee, if we can, because I don't think that should be that complicated. And then once we get through these couple of things, we're going to get to the fun stuff. Ms. Coe will be here. Okay?
I have put together the working draft,
Okay.
and once you vote on things, you voted on the first thing tonight, I think, the first change. I'll put that in the working draft with a footnote, voted
Okay.
on X date, so you'll have a running
That'll be great.
look at what the proposed revised charter could look like.
That would be great.
And you can change it 1,000 times, but at least they'll all be captured
Yeah,
here.
no, I appreciate that.
And the other thing I've done is, I actually left this in, the last changes from the last Charter Revision Commission are still in here in bold, so you'll be able to see what happened last time, too.
So
So-
you'll send this out email prior to the
Yeah,
next
I'll
meeting?
send it to Tom, and Tom can send it out.
Okay.
We'll put in the change you approved tonight, we'll footnote it, so you know when you did it, and then we'll just keep going. This way you'll always be able to see the big picture.
I think we're,
One other thing, we had talked earlier about having some town managers come in and speak with us.
yeah,
And I
as we
just-
hit
as we
areas
hit that,
that,
so
that-
you-
just
okay.
like I said with the planning and zoning
Great.
people, I want somebody in from each body. Any body or commission or
Great.
board that it affects,
Great.
I want somebody who represents them here. That's why we had Joe here tonight
That's
for
perfect.
finance.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a clarification, the document that was handed out, these are the town charters for each of the towns here?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I put Simsbury in there just so you could, do a side-by-side comparison.
Thank you.
If you want any others, let me know. It's easy enough to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have, as just a quick overview of those, I think I can do that without violating our agenda here. Town of Darien is a first selectman system. It has a chief administrative officer that is more formally recognized. The remaining three are all town managers. There are differences from one town to another in terms of what, and at some point, I'll try to do kind of a summary so that we have a short.
That'd be very helpful.
The other thing to sort of look at in these different charters is how they treat the Board of Finance.
Right.
Sometimes they're advisory, sometimes they have full powers. Town manager, Board of Finance relationship is very important to focus on because, the town manager form of government generally cedes a lot of the budget-making authority to the town manager with final approval by the legislative body. And sort of, if there is a remnant Board of Finance, it's usually an advisory board. Doesn't have to be, but that's kind of a core power of a town manager. That and the appointment of department heads. Those two are really the meat and potatoes of the town manager form of government.
Does anybody know if any of these towns have that blended form of Board of Selectmen town manager that Joan was referencing, that Lisa had referenced? Do we know that?
I'm not, the answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I mean,
I will read and find out.
I'm not sure quite what was meant, what those guys were describing, so.
I think
But
there are
Tom,
about
just-
35 town managers in the state of Connecticut. 35 or so. We could get that from CCN.
They tend to be for the larger for towns our size and up. We have comparable towns that we use for things like setting salaries, and we include in that at sort of on the smaller side, we have Canton, which is also it has a first selectman, but it has a chief operating officer. The balance of the towns we use are town manager. Certainly every other town in the valley is, and the ones here. So, but, there are also towns our size that continue to use the first selectman system.
Westport does that.
Westport, Plainfield, I believe, a number of others.
Just to clarify your comments on Darien, they have a chief administrative officer?
That's my understanding. I think I've got that.
That serves kind of the role of a town manager?
Yeah, it may look a little bit like the hybrid that Lisa was talking about, but I don't know specifically.
And that's a paid and a non-elected position?
Non-elected position. It is in the charter, which is a difference.
Okay. Anything else tonight? Thank you all.
Thank
Go to your meeting. We're adjourned. Tom and Bob, if I can get you guys.